The moment the fake security guard walked away, a lingering unease settled over me. I had won that confrontation, at least that's what it looked like on the surface. But as I stood there, watching him disappear into the night, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Who was he, really? And more importantly, why was he doing this? Back home, I sat down at my laptop, fingers drumming against the keyboard. Fake HOA security scams. A few hits popped up. News articles, forum discussions, and a handful of Reddit threads filled with horror stories of bogus enforcers harassing residents, sometimes even scamming them for money. The pattern was eerily familiar. Most of these cases had one thing in common: the perpetrators rarely got caught. That sent a chill through me. If this guy had been doing this for a while, how many others had just backed down, never questioning his authority? A knock at my door yanked me from my thoughts. I opened it to find Mrs. Dawson, my elderly neighbor, clutching her sweater like she had just walked through a storm. Her eyes darted around before she leaned in. "That man from earlier," she whispered. "You stood up to him. That was brave." I frowned. "Did he bother you too?" She hesitated, then nodded. "A few nights ago. He told me I wasn't allowed to walk my dog near the entrance. Said it was private property. I thought it was odd, but I didn't want any trouble, so I just left." My stomach twisted. So it wasn't just me. "Mrs. Dawson, did he say anything else? Did he threaten you?" She glanced over her shoulder. "No, but he watched me. For a long time. It felt wrong. Something bigger was happening here, and I was going to find out exactly what." Hey, real quick, if you're enjoying the video so far, make sure to hit that like button, share it with friends, and subscribe for more awesome content. And while you're at it, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. All right, let's keep going. I wasn't the type to let things go, especially not when something felt this wrong. The next evening, I found myself walking the same path near the gated community, hands in my pockets, eyes scanning every detail. The sunset bathed the neighborhood in a golden glow, but beneath the picturesque calm, something felt off. The first thing I noticed? The cameras. From a distance they looked legit, mounted high on poles near the entrance. Little red lights, blinking like they were recording. But as I got closer, I realized the truth. They weren't moving. Most security cameras, the real ones, track motion, subtle shifts to follow movement, but these, frozen. Like someone had put them up for show, just to make people think they were being watched. I frowned. What kind of security system was this? As I walked farther in, I caught glimpses of residents, some watering their lawns, others heading inside. But one thing stood out. No one made eye contact. It wasn't normal suburban indifference. It was something deeper. Like they knew something, but wouldn't say it. I decided to go straight to the source. The next morning, I called the HOA office. A woman answered, her voice crisp and rehearsed. "This is Maplewood HOA. How can I assist you?" I kept it casual. "Hey, I had some concerns about the security in the neighborhood. Is there an official company handling it?" A pause. Slightly too long. "Our security measures are handled internally," she said finally. "Is there a specific issue you'd like to report?" I wasn't buying it. "Yeah, a guard stopped me the other night. He refused to show credentials and acted like he owned the place." Silence. Again. Then, "I'm sorry, but I don't have any information on that." Click. She hung up. That was it. No explanation, no attempt to reassure me, just a cold, dismissive shutdown. Something was wrong here. As I left the area, frustrated and more suspicious than ever, a voice called out from behind a parked car. "You asking too many questions." I turned. A man stood there, mid-40s, baseball cap pulled low. He glanced around before stepping closer. "Listen, I don't know who you are, but if you're smart, you'll drop this." My pulse spiked. "Why? What's going on here?" He exhaled sharply, glancing toward the HOA office like he expected someone to be watching. "You ever wonder where all the money goes?" I frowned. "What do you mean?" He shook his head. "The security, the HOA fees, the budget. Start looking into the numbers." Then, without another word, he turned and walked away. I stood there, heart pounding. Security cameras that didn't work. a fake guard trying to enforce non-existent rules, an HOA office refusing to answer simple questions. And now, someone hinting at missing money? I had a feeling I was only scratching the surface, and whatever was underneath, it wasn't going to be pretty. I wasn't expecting trouble, but trouble had a way of finding me. That morning, as I stepped outside, I immediately knew something was wrong. My car sat in its usual spot, but the windshield was different. Scratched, smeared, defaced. My gut tightened as I approached. A single piece of paper was stuck under the wiper, flapping in the breeze. Not an advertisement, not a parking violation. A message. Drop it. Some things are bigger than you. The words were thick, bold, written in red ink. Or was it ink? A chill prickled down my spine. I scanned my surroundings. The street was quiet, eerily so. Neighbors went about their routines. Watering, lawns, walking dogs, but something felt different, like eyes were on me. I glanced at the houses nearby. No obvious movement, no one watching from behind curtains, but the feeling didn't leave. Someone had done this, and someone was watching now, waiting to see how I'd react. I wasn't about to back down. I pulled out my phone and snapped a picture of the note, along with the scratch marks on my windshield. The damage wasn't random, it was deliberate, etched in long, deep streaks. This wasn't some punk kids pulling a prank. This was a warning, and I wasn't the only target. An hour later, an envelope landed in my mailbox. No stamp, no return address. Hand-delivered. I opened it with careful fingers, already expecting the worst. Inside was a legal-looking document formatted like an official HOA violation notice. Date: today. Resident. My address. Violation: unauthorized inquiries into HOA operations and security procedures. Penalty: immediate compliance required to avoid further escalation. I actually laughed. They didn't even try to make it sound legit. Who gets a fine for asking questions? They were getting desperate. That meant I was getting close. I took a deep breath, forcing my heartbeat to slow. This was intimidation, plain and simple. Someone wanted me scared, paranoid. They wanted me to stop. Instead, they'd done the opposite. Wasn't going to let this slide. Whoever was behind this had resources, connections, enough influence to fake legal documents, enough nerve to vandalize my car in broad daylight. But that also meant they were worried. Worried that I might find something, worried that I might expose them. Good. Let them worry. Because now, I was all in. If they thought a scratched-up windshield and a fake HOA notice would scare me off, they were dead wrong. In fact, they had just made one critical mistake. They made me curious, and I had a feeling the answers I needed were hidden, behind the polished doors of the HOA board. The next HOA meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m. at the community center, a beige, windowless building that looked like it had been designed specifically to kill enthusiasm. I arrived early, wearing a button-up and carrying a notepad, hoping to blend in as just another concerned resident. The room was small, with folding chairs lined up in stiff rows. The HOA board members sat at a long table in the front, their faces carefully neutral. Some looked bored, others tense. As the meeting began, they droned on about landscaping budgets and parking violations, typical HOA nonsense meant to bore people into submission. Then they got to security, and that's when things got interesting. A woman in the audience raised her hand. I noticed our security fees increased this year. Can we get a breakdown of where that money is going? At the front table, the HOA treasurer, a balding man in a sweater vest, shifted uncomfortably. Security costs have risen due to increased patrols and better community protection, he said smoothly. It's all detailed in the budget report. I leaned forward. I'd love to see that. His eyes flicked to me. Who are you again? Just a resident concerned about security, I said with a polite smile. He hesitated, then pulled out a printed spreadsheet. I scanned the page, and immediately, red flags jumped out. Security budget. Doubled in the last 6 months, new security company hired, but no company name listed, just an independent contractor. No invoices, no employee breakdowns, no specifics. Just vague numbers and a huge chunk of money unaccounted for. This wasn't just sloppy bookkeeping. This was a cover-up. I raised my hand again. Who exactly is providing security for the neighborhood? Now? The treasurer cleared his throat. An outside contractor, private firm. What's their name? Silence. A woman on the board glanced at him nervously. It's all in the paperwork. No, it's not, I shot back. I'm looking at the budget right now and there's no company name listed. Just independent contractor. That's weird, right? The room shifted. Other residents murmured, flipping through their copies of the report. The treasurer's face tightened. It's standard practice, is it? I pressed. Because I did some checking. The security cameras at the entrance? Half of them don't even work. And your so-called security guards? At least one of them is a fraud. The air thickened. The woman on the board, the one who had looked nervous, wouldn't meet my eyes. But the treasurer? His jaw clenched. I had hit a nerve. He shifted in his seat, reaching for his water glass like it was some kind of lifeline. Sir, if you have concerns, you're welcome to file a formal complaint with the board. I already did, I said flatly. You ignored it. More murmurs. A few. Other residents looked at me, then at the treasurer. Then someone in the back spoke up. Wait, does this have anything to do with that security guy who got arrested last week? A ripple went through the room. I turned to see an older man, arms crossed, watching the board carefully. The treasurer's face paled. We're not at liberty to discuss that incident. Bingo. I leaned back. So, we're just supposed to believe that our security fees doubled. A mysterious private firm took over, and then suddenly we had a guy running around pretending to be law enforcement. And no one on this board finds that suspicious? Silence. The treasurer glanced at the HOA president, a stiff-looking woman in her 60s. She gave him a barely perceptible nod. This meeting is adjourned. Just like that. No discussion, no explanation, just a rushed shutdown. I stepped outside, the night air cool against my skin. I had expected resistance, but they were scared. I was about to head home when a voice whispered from the shadows, Hey, over here. I turned. A man, maybe mid-50s, wearing a windbreaker, stood partially hidden behind a tree. His face was tense like he was debating whether to talk to me at all. I saw what you did in there, he said. You're asking the right questions, but you're not gonna like the answers. I took a slow step toward him. What do you know? He sighed, glancing around as if expecting someone to be listening. You ever hear about, ghost security firms? I frowned. No. His jaw tightened. Then you'd better start looking into them. I opened my mouth to press further, but before I could, he turned and walked off into the darkness. I stood there, heart hammering, a fake security guard, a mysterious company, a vanishing informant. This wasn't just about HOA corruption anymore. This was something much, much bigger, and I was in the middle of it. If these people didn't want to answer my questions, I'd find a way to make them talk. And that meant setting a trap. The next morning I called the HOA office, this time using a different approach. Hi, I'm looking to buy a property in the neighborhood, I said, keeping my tone light. I just have a few questions about security before making a decision. That got their attention. Within an hour, I had a call back from a man named Mr. Larkin, supposedly the head of the HOA's private security firm. He agreed to meet that afternoon at a local cafe. I didn't know what I'd find, but something told me this wouldn't be a normal business meeting. Mr. Larkin arrived 10 minutes late, slicked back hair, oversized sunglasses, and a suit that looked expensive but didn't quite fit right. I had seen enough con artists to recognize one on sight. We shook hands and I noted how his grip was too firm, like he was trying too hard to establish dominance. So, you're interested in Maplewood? He asked smoothly. I nodded. Security is my top concern. I heard great things about your company. Of course, he said, flashing a too-perfect smile. We provide only the best. Private. Patrols. Discreet enforcement. The highest level of safety for residents. I leaned forward. Great. So, what's your company's name? A flicker of hesitation. Then, Maplewood Security Solutions. I had already searched that name online before the meeting. It didn't exist. I played along. Do you have a website? Maybe a business address? Larkin took a slow sip of his coffee. We operate under a private contract. No need for all that public advertising nonsense. Translation? No paper trail. I pushed further. And your licensing? Any official credentials? His smile never faded, but his posture stiffened. We don't disclose that information to non-residents, he said smoothly. If you decide to move in, you'll receive full details. Bullshit. This wasn't a real security company, it was a front, and now I had everything I needed. What Larkin didn't know was that I had been recording the entire conversation. As I got up to leave, Larkin extended a hand. Looking forward to working with you, he said. I shook it, keeping my expression neutral. Yeah, we'll be in touch. I walked out, my heart racing. I had them. Now, I just needed to figure out who was really behind this scam. Then, my phone rang. Unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. Hello? Silence. Then a voice. Low, cold, and unmistakably threatening. You should have stopped digging when you had the chance. Click. The line went dead. A chill ran down my spine. I wasn't just exposing a scam anymore. I had just become their next target. That phone call changed everything. It wasn't just a threat. It was a message. We see you. We know what you're doing. Stop now or else, but instead of scaring me off, it did the opposite. Now I needed to know exactly who I was dealing with. I started digging. The fake security guard, the one who tried to intimidate me on the sidewalk, hadn't just vanished after his arrest. His name had been scrubbed from official reports, and the HOA refused to comment on the situation. That didn't sit right with me, so I did something I probably shouldn't have done. I called in a favor. A friend of mine, someone with access to police records, agreed to look into him, and when he called me back, his voice was different. You sure you want to mess with this guy? Why? Because he used to be one of us. My breath caught. The fake security guard was an ex-cop, fired years ago. Multiple bribery accusations, excessive force complaints, ties to shady security firms, but somehow he never faced any real consequences, which meant he still had friends in high places. I needed more. I started talking to residents, the ones who seemed nervous, the ones who had avoided eye contact at the meeting. One of them, an older man named Mr. Reynolds, finally cracked. He pulled me aside, voice low, eyes darting around like someone might be listening. Some of us, we pay extra, he admitted. I frowned. Extra? He nodded. Security fees, but not through the HOA. Through them. Who's them? His jaw clenched. The guys running this whole thing. They told us if we paid, our homes would be prioritized. If we didn't, well, accidents happen. My stomach twisted. This wasn't just a fake security scam. This was organized extortion. People were paying for protection from the very people threatening them. I went back to the HOA budget report, this time looking for connections, and that's when I saw it. A pattern. The new security fees had increased right around the time the fake guard was hired. The board members claimed ignorance, but was that true? Were they just pawns, blindly approving contracts, or were they in on it, getting a cut of the money while pretending to look the other way? I didn't know yet, but I did know one thing. This was bigger than I ever imagined, and if I kept pushing, wasn't just going to expose a scam. I was going to expose the people behind it. I didn't have time to play it safe anymore. I had the evidence, the missing money, the fake security company, the extortion scheme. And now, I was going straight to the people in charge. It was time to confront the head of the HOA board. I didn't bother with an appointment. I walked straight into the HOA office, where a receptionist gave me a tight-lipped smile. Mr. Holloway is in a meeting. I leaned on the counter. That's fine, I'll wait. 5 minutes later, James Holloway, the HOA president, stepped out. Gray suit, graying hair, and a mask of confidence that barely hid the nervous energy beneath. What can I do for you? He asked. I handed him a folder, printed copies of everything I'd found. His expression barely flickered as he flipped through the pages, but when he reached the section about unauthorized security payments, his fingers tensed. This is ridiculous. He tossed the papers on his desk. You don't understand how HOA finances work. I leaned forward. Then explain it to me. Explain why you're funneling thousands of dollars into a security firm that doesn't exist. Silence. I pushed harder. Or better yet, why some residents are being forced to pay extra for protection from your own people." His jaw clenched. "I don't have to answer to you." "No." I pulled out my phone, tapping the screen. "Because I'm about to send all of this to the press and the police." Now I had his attention. His face paled. For the first time, he looked truly afraid. "Wait." That night, I set up a live-streamed video meeting for the residents. I wasn't going to let Holloway spin this in his favor. I wanted everyone to hear the truth. As the Zoom call filled with homeowners, I began laying out the facts. The fake security guard, the missing funds, the HOA's silence. People gasped. Angry voices overlapped. Then, in the middle of it all, a sound outside. Car screeching to a stop. A moment later, someone pounded on my door. I turned to the camera. "Hold on." I grabbed my phone and stepped outside, and there he was, the fake security guard. But this time, he wasn't trying to act professional. He looked furious, desperate, and worst of all, he wasn't alone. Behind him stood two other men, built like bouncers, dressed in black. I took a slow breath. "You lost your badge. Now what? You gonna try threats?" He took a step closer. "You don't know what you've done." "Oh, I think I do." I held up my phone. The live stream was still running. The comments section was blowing up. People were watching. This unfolded in real time. His eyes flicked to the phone. He hesitated. Then he pulled something from his belt. Not a gun, but a baton. "Turn it off." His voice was sharp, low, a threat wrapped in a command. I didn't move. From behind me, porch lights flicked on. Neighbors stepped outside, watching, whispering. For the first time, he wasn't in control, and he knew it. Then, sirens! A patrol car skidded into view. Doors flew open. Real officers stepped out, guns drawn, hands where we can see them. The fake guard hesitated, his mind racing for an escape, but it was over. He dropped the baton and raised his hands. His. Two goons did the same. I exhaled, finally. The cops loaded him into the car. They weren't just taking him in for questioning this time. They were charging him. The next morning, the HOA board held an emergency meeting. James Holloway resigned, and the entire fake security operation exposed. But something still nagged at me. How deep did this go? Because if these guys were just the muscle, who was really pulling the strings? The moment the police took them away, I thought it was over. I stood there watching as the fake security guard, the man who had tried so hard to intimidate me, was shoved into the back of a squad car, his face twisted with anger. His two goons followed, cuffed and silent. I should have felt relieved. I should have felt safe. But something about the way he looked at me, the way his lips curled into the slightest smirk before the car door slammed shut, left me uneasy. Like, he knew something I didn't. The police confirmed everything. For over a year, the scam had been running. A fake security operation, disguised as an HOA-approved service, had been extorting residents under the guise of extra protection. The fake guard? He wasn't working alone. He was just one piece of a larger operation. And the worst part? Some of the HOA board members had known. Not all of them. Some were clueless, just as fooled as the residents. But others, they had signed off on payments, looked the other way, kept their mouths shut. It wasn't just negligence, it was complicity. James Holloway, the HOA president who had tried so hard to deny everything, was now under investigation. I should have felt victorious, but that uneasy feeling in my gut wouldn't go away. The next morning, I stepped outside to get the newspaper. The sun was barely rising, casting long shadows over the quiet neighborhood. That's when I saw him. A man, standing on the sidewalk across the street, dressed in a security uniform, not the same one as before. This was different, new, freshly pressed. But the way he stood there, still as a statue, watching my house, it felt exactly the same. A chill crept up my spine. I stared at him. He didn't move, didn't even pretend to be doing a patrol, just stood there, watching, waiting. Then, as if he knew I had figured it out, he smiled, a slow, knowing smirk, and walked away. I didn't move, didn't call out to him, didn't chase after him, because in that moment, a terrible thought hit me like a freight train. I hadn't stopped anything. I had just peeled back one layer. This wasn't just some small-time con run by a couple of guys. This was bigger, deeper, organized, the fake guard I had exposed. He was replaceable, and now they had already replaced him. I went back inside. Locking the door behind me, my phone buzzed. A message from one of the residents. "Thank you for what you did. We feel safer now." I exhaled slowly. Safer. The truth was, I wasn't sure we were safe at all, because if these guys could embed themselves into one neighborhood, how many other neighborhoods had they already infiltrated, and how many more would follow? I glanced out the window, my stomach twisting. The new guard was gone, but I knew it was only a matter of time before I saw him again, or worse, someone else. Someone I wouldn't see coming, and just like that I realized this wasn't the end, it was only the beginning. If you enjoyed this video and want to see the next part, let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to stay updated. See you in the next one. Your support means the world.